Hello, my name is Zach Lucy. I'm a graduate student at NC State, here representing the Student Energy Club for our Energy Spotlight series, where we interview movers and shakers in the energy field. Today we're speaking with Steve Kalland. Steve is the policy expert and executive director at the North Carolina Clean Tech Center, which is housed here at NC State. Hi, Steve.
Howdy.
Thanks for talking with me today.
No, thanks for the invitation. Glad to do it.
Can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your work, and your journey in the energy field?
Sure. It's getting to be a long story because I'm getting old. But yeah, I first got into clean energy shortly after grad school in 1993, believe it or not. So I started in the solar industry, kind of by dumb luck, really. I was in Washington, D.C. I was job hunting. I went to visit a friend of mine from my undergraduate institution, William & Mary, and while I was having drinks with her, she invited me to a party later that night. And we went to the party at the near the convention center in DC at the time. Turned out that it was a party that was a part of the what was then called Soltech Conference, which was the solar industry's premier national event. And I met a whole bunch of people in the solar industry and, had a few drinks and decided that that was a field that I was interested in. And the next day, my friend took my resume with her to work, and they hired me 2 weeks later as an analyst at the Solar Energy Industries Association. So it was kind of dumb luck that I got into it, but I've loved the field. It is both fascinating work and really, I feel, important work. And so I've had a good time doing this now for many, many years.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I want to talk about some of the work the center has going on. Currently, one of the center's latest initiatives is a study looking at the potential for offshore wind in North Carolina. I know it's not out quite yet, but I'm hoping you can highlight some of the findings of the study. Do you see offshore wind taking off in North Carolina, and when could it become a reality?
Yeah, so offshore wind's an interesting question. It's a technology that has really come into its own in the last few years, and we're watching the cost curves in offshore wind do what the cost curves in solar did, a decade or a decade and a half ago now. So we're really watching the pricing kind of move in the right direction. This particular study is actually for the Department of Commerce, and it is focused around the supply chain associated with offshore wind. Mm-hmm. So we're really not looking at, offshore wind as an energy resource so much as we're looking at it as an opportunity to create jobs and investment in the state of North Carolina that benefit citizens here. Mm-hmm. But it turns out that those two issues are kind of integrally tied, right? You want to usually build your equipment, especially equipment that is as large as these offshore wind turbines are, as close to where the project is being done as possible. And so we're in competition for a roughly 40 gigawatt offshore wind market that is emerging off the East Coast. This is $100 billion market or so. That's going to get constructed over the next 10 to 15 years. And we're in competition with states from Maine all the way down the coast to South Carolina. We have some real distinct advantages in this process in terms of attracting those jobs, and we have some disadvantages. And so this report is really designed to kind of wheedle through all that and figure out which parts of the supply chain conversation are the parts that make the most sense for North Carolina to push on and pursue.
Great. I'd like to get one of those jobs.
Well, it's interesting, a lot of the jobs are going to be just basically manufacturing jobs. And this is actually one of North Carolina's real advantages. We're a manufacturing state. We're a state that knows how to do manufacturing and do it well. But whether you're manufacturing car parts for the auto industry or offshore wind turbine parts for that industry, a lot of the jobs are pretty much just manufacturing jobs. Mm-hmm. But that said, if we can create enough market pull in this end of the East Coast to kind of convince this manufacturing to shift our direction, there will be deployment jobs. There'll be construction jobs. I was looking at, who's teaching marine welding in the state of North Carolina as a part of this conversation. Those kinds of skills are going to be important. And then there's going to, once we get the things built, there'll be significant jobs for operation and maintenance of these facilities. So, it's a mix of kind of traditional manufacturing and then kind of more what you would think of as, renewable energy jobs.
Yeah. Well, speaking of supply chains, we don't have a lot of time. I want to touch on solar as well. And I'm curious, how has the solar industry weathered the pandemic so far?
I think it's been better than a lot of people expected. The fact that the pricing for solar has gotten to be so competitive with other potential resources really has helped on the utility scale side. We've had a slowdown in the North Carolina utility scale market, but nationally, I think the overall trend lines for utility scale solar are quite good. And, we continue to see that grow even in states that you would never imagine. I had to go and do some work in Kentucky not too long ago, working with local government officials that were trying to figure out how to do permitting for solar development there. States like Kentucky and Indiana and Alabama are all becoming target markets for for solar now. So that's all great. The rooftop market, has also done better than I think most people expected during the pandemic. The companies had a real dip. If you look at the national numbers, there was a real dip in sales in Q2 of the year. But by Q3, a lot of the companies had taken this as an excuse to figure out how to do online sales better, faster, and more efficiently. And they actually saved a lot of money doing that. And so a lot of these companies' economic trends are looking pretty robust right now because they've actually turned this into an opportunity to become more efficient themselves. And so we're seeing national trend lines that look pretty good on the rooftop sales.
Okay. I want to move to some broader policy questions. Can you name a couple energy policies that have been implemented either elsewhere in this country or internationally that you would like to see replicated here in North Carolina?
So there are lots of things that are being implemented that I would like to see be done in North Carolina. There are a lot of those things, though, that probably are not terribly likely. North Carolina as a state has kind of gotten out of the direct incentives business. And so states that have, cash on the table for, putting solar on your rooftop or, buying an electric vehicle or putting a charging station in your garage, those states, it's much easier to kind of goose the market along. And North Carolina used to do that sort of thing, but it's been the philosophy of the political leadership in the state to kind of move away from, kind of industry-specific incentives and toward, broader base, low taxes. So certainly incentives are always helpful, but once you get past that, I think it really comes down to a conversation of how can we make it easier to do this. One of the big pushes that's coming around nationally on the solar front right now that I think North Carolina could really look at is a Department of Energy program that's focused around improving and speeding up permitting for solar. It's one of the steps in the process that's very uneven because permitting is handled in local jurisdictions, and in a lot of cases, permit officials have never even seen solar before. And so they're not really sure how to permit it, or at least they don't have a lot of experience with it. And so there's a lot of efforts right now from the national perspective to kind of streamline that and make it simpler and bring it online so that there's an app to help facilitate it. And if North Carolina could kind of work to adopt that, I think it would do a lot to help make rooftop solar run more smoothly. Net metering, of course, is always another program that we like to see. Net metering is basically a program that lets you hook solar to the grid and run your meter. It's not exactly like this, but from an engineering standpoint, but from a policy standpoint, it basically means your meter runs backward and you get a retail credit for whatever you push back into the grid. It's just a simplifying way to be able to do solar and make it more cost effective and be able to get more use out of the solar when you're generating it. On the larger scale technologies, I think that there's a lot of conversation right now about decarbonization policies. I think that the state's renewable portfolio standard, for example, which is basically a rule that says utilities had to provide a certain percentage of their energy from renewable resources. We were the first and the only in the Southeast, but I think that that program is due for an overhaul now, and whether it's expanding it into a larger clean energy standard that might be inclusive of nuclear energy as well as renewables, but goes to closer to 100% instead of the 12.5% we're currently at. That might be something to look at. And then there's a lot to do on the procurement side as well to try and make it easier for utilities to actually purchase renewable energy and get it into the system. And so there's a lot of reforms being discussed on that front. It depends. I think for offshore wind, the answer is yes. Right now, I think that the process runs through a federal agency called BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. It's part of the Department of Interior. The offshore wind permitting is slow. There's also a moratorium that was put in place for offshore drilling off the East Coast, but the language was written in a way that it actually is inclusive of offshore wind. And it's not the kind of thing that can just, a new president can come in and wave his hand and make it go away, is what I'm told by the lawyers. But my expectation is that, if the Senate winds up in Democratic hands, which seems to be the way things are trending today, at least on Tuesday, Wednesday now, that it seems like there would be a pretty easy fix legislatively to undo that moratorium and facilitate more offshore wind. But it is funny, permitting, a lot of people don't think it's that big of a deal. It seems like it should be fairly straightforward, but for both solar and wind, even utility scale solar, permitting and issues around decommissioning have really been the bugaboo in the last few years. And I've spent a lot of time working with folks over in CALS and in other ag-related organizations around the country, trying to help sort through what are the real issues that local communities should be worried about. Solar is not going to pollute the groundwater or create noises at night that make you not sleep, or create electromagnetic fields that make your cat explode if it wanders too close. And believe it or not, I've actually heard all of those things in hearings. Those are the easy ones to dismiss, though. But there are legitimate questions, as we put literally hundreds of thousands of solar panels out there, about how do we eventually decommission and recycle those panels so that we don't put them all into landfills, and things like that. So, it turns out permitting is not a simple issue. It's becoming a much bigger one as these industries become more successful.
Okay. Who are some of the key decision makers, either locally, statewide, or nationally, in terms of policy that can help propel decarbonization of the economy? They're elected officials, obviously, but I'm guessing there's some other key actors that folks might not know as much about.
Well, when you're talking about decarbonization of the electric sector, probably the most relevant people are going to be utility executives and regulatory commissioners. In North Carolina, we have the NCUC, the North Carolina Utilities Commission, and those folks do take a lot of their lead from the General Assembly, but they are probably the policymakers that have the most to do day to day with how policy gets implemented that will either benefit renewables and help us to wind down traditional fossil energy or not. So on the electric power side, those are key folks to keep in mind. Always the General Assembly in any state is critical to know. And that also goes for these local officials. A lot of these barriers to deployment of solar that I talked about a second ago with regard to permitting, that's the stuff that the local planning board and the local board of county commissioners weighs in on. And, those are critical issues for them because they see the economic and job creation potential for their communities, but they're worried about people showing up at local hearings telling them that there's going to be some problem. And so you got to navigate all of that. The other piece I'd remind everybody of is that, a lot of the decarbonization discussion is actually around the transportation sector. And so making sure that you have some sense as to what's going on with regard to transportation policy matters. Some of that is mass transit policy and making sure that we have access, especially now that the pandemic has done, basically a wrecking ball job on a lot of the mass transit programs around the country financially. But to be able to move in the direction of getting more electric vehicles on the road and more infrastructure to charge those electric vehicles deployed. Those are important pieces, and their interactions of, highway people and state departments of transportation, but also air regulatory people and the power sector people. So it's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah. We'll follow up on that question. How can we make sure some of these decision makers favor policies that support a clean energy economy? I'm thinking of folks at the NCUC or transportation officials. Sort of, in other words, how are they influenced, and what motivates them, or what hinders them in making more climate-friendly policies?
Well, I mean, it does vary a little bit depending on who you're talking about. The agencies that are, in a lot of cases, the bureaucratic folks that are implementing policies, they're usually pretty good about going out and seeking out facts. But when you're talking about elected officials, whether they're at the federal, the state, or the local level, they're the people that are there to interact with the citizenry and to hear what our preferences are. And in a lot of cases, they have to know a little bit about everything, which makes it very hard for them to know a lot about anything. And so when somebody shows up and makes the claim that, solar panels are going to absorb sunlight from the atmosphere and drain the sun, if they're not science people, they may put some credence in that claim. I hope not that claim, but you get the idea. And so, as NC State students, you guys are educated, and you have the skills to become more educated. And if you think these are important issues, it's important to have facts, and then to bring those facts to policymakers and tell them why it is that you wish they would support policies that are in favor of those facts. The climate denial is one of the worst things that has ever happened to the world, and our country is unfortunately one of the leaders in peddling it. And so, if we want to save this planet and we want to get to a point where we're moving policy in a direction that keeps this place habitable for our grandchildren, and maybe in y'all's case, your children, we need to get facts in front of policymakers so that they understand the urgency of moving in the right direction. And so, they always used to say that, 80% of the battle, 90% of the battle is showing up. Showing up with facts is 80 or 90% of the battle. And then, from there, it's a discussion. But if you guys show up and you talk to those policymakers and you explain to them why these issues are important to you, they'll listen.
Great. Well, wrapping up, this is geared towards students. So I want to ask, what opportunities are there for undergrads and graduates, students, to collaborate with the Clean Tech Center?
Well, we're always looking for interns. In fact, Allison Carr, C-A-R-R, on our staff runs our intern program. And so if folks want to look her up, if they're interested in an internship, both either for the spring semester or for the summer, Allison would be the person to reach out to. We are frequently limited in the ability to pay interns, unfortunately. Sometimes we have resources through projects, other times not. But we are very interested in supporting students in getting experience in the field. Also, I'm always happy to meet with folks and talk with them about what the center's up to. If they've got a specific company or a specific type of job that they're looking for the summer, I'm always happy to make introductions where I can. That said, there's a huge number of different groups on campus that do work in the clean energy space. The work that we do tends to be on the extension and engagement side of the university, if you will. But if you're more of a research person, there's groups like the Freedom Systems Center in engineering that does work on power electronics and grid integration of renewable technology. There's a group over in natural resources centered around a new certificate program over there. They do work in a lot of the land use issues and permitting issues around renewable energy technology. Christopher Galick is a professor over in public administration. He's always looking for students that are interested in the public administration side of renewables. I don't know if he's got internships, but he's a faculty member that's looking to recruit students into his graduate program that are interested in energy. Harrison Fell
taking his class in the spring.
Oh, there you go. He's a great guy. Harrison Fell is a professor in ag and resource economics. He's also interested in a lot of the same things and does work in economics and energy. So, I mean, it's the beauty of NC State's campus is whatever your interest is and whatever your skill set is, we need it in the clean energy field. And there's a lot of people here that you can start with at least to try and get your foot in the door.
Great. Well, we're right at 20 minutes. So thanks so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Anytime.
Okay. Take care. Thanks, Steve.
Yep. Take care.